All right. Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of the Channel 42 podcast with your hosts, Troy Martin and Phil Morgan. And today we have joining us two special guests. The next in the series of CWISE certified individuals, we have JD, CWISE number 5, and Dr Avril Salter, CWISE number 6. Welcome to the Channel 42 podcast.
Thank you.
Thank you, Troy.
Hey, guys and gals, welcome.
Thanks, Phil.
So it hasn't been that long since we just recorded, and just to get us going right off the start here, I'm curious to hear you guys' perspective, Avril and JD. I just recently saw a tweet, people trying to explain and define what IoT means, right? And there's a lot of different definitions out there. So I thought I'd pass that question on to you two to get us going here. If you could just define IT, what you guys think it means in your minds, and maybe something that might be more relevant, where do you draw the line between, the edge of IT and what's not IoT? So why don't we start with you, Avril, if that's okay? If you let us know your thoughts.
That's fine. Now I'm wishing that I could remember the official CWISE definition of what IoT is, because I cannot remember it. So if anybody's listening to this and doing the search, don't follow what I think IoT is. So IoT to me, because I'm more of a low-level person, what it means to me is something really that allows a really small, simple radio to go into any device and to put it up on the network. And to me, it's as simple as that. I mean, I know a lot of people focus on the applications and get delivered and those kind of things. But to me, it's all about keeping it simple, getting a radio and everything and getting it connected. And then I think once you've got that, then the application and the world changes. I don't think you can really predict where the applications are going once you've connected all of these things.
Awesome, great. So it's kind of the little pieces that kind of stack and build on top of each other and basically allow you to put together a solution that can go anywhere.
Yes.
Based on connecting two radios.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And getting on the network. And I think, a lot of people, obviously, because I'm a low-level person in terms of where I tend to focus my expertise, but a lot of people are more about how does it get a business goal and where's business direction is going in. I just like to think of it as the connectivity and just getting connection and then letting the world innovate around that.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. Yeah. Thanks. JD, what are your thoughts?
I really like Avril's take on that. I think in my personal view, the Internet of Things is different from the Internet of People, right? So for a long time, every device had a person who owned it, and all of the servers and services that were offered on the Internet were for people's consumption. The Internet of Things is about connecting a lot of headless devices or a lot of devices that aren't necessarily going to be assigned to an individual. And so when I think of Internet of Things, it's anything that falls into that bucket. I've been playing around with a lot of the protocols for a long time. We'll probably get into this a little bit more later, but that's ultimately what it's been. It's a light bulb that ultimately, I control and I manage, but it's not like I sit down in a console on that light bulb and I don't consume content on that light bulb. And so it's really protocol independent. There's a bunch of different ways that we'll kind of talk about that a little bit as well, that those may be connected, whether it's just straight over Wi-Fi or one of the other protocols, but it's about a device that doesn't necessarily have a user from the traditional sense that is being connected out to either the internet or even just locally on the local network and is either consuming or providing services.
Okay. Yeah, so let's complete the loop here, and let's go to you, Phil. What are your thoughts on what defines an IoT component or architecture or system?
Well, I prefer to use the philosophy of IoE, which is a Cisco thing that they brought out, which is the Internet of Everything. And the point is that it's a thing that's connected to the Internet. I'm going to keep it that simple. And I also include Wi-Fi in that. Wi-Fi is an enabler for the Internet of Things. We tend to call it Wi-Fi because we've got experience with it. But an IoT is a thing that is connected to the Internet, and especially with 802.11ax coming out now, with all the wake timers and things, I think Wi-Fi is going to become more of a platform on which we run the Internet of Things. But typically, IoT is exclusive of Wi-Fi, but I think that's going to change. And I think that the Internet of Things is anything we can connect to the Internet. Smart buttons, sensors for diabetes and such things that measure attributes of your body, temperature measurements on the side of big tanks, flow measurements. And of course, we always talk about the Internet of Things as measuring. And I want to remind everybody that it works the other way as well. We can actually have actuators that can adjust the flow and the functionality of things. So the simplest example is a temperature gauge. Measure the temperature in your room. If it gets too warm or too cold, it sends a message, and another system activates a heater or a cooler, an air conditioner or something to change the temperature. So it's like a feedback loop. And I think that's the biggest impact we have on the Internet of Things. Then, of course, we have fun things. My Christmas lights are controlled as an Internet of Thing, just simply because I don't want to walk outside and unplug them every evening. So I have a little IoT device that I plugged into my smart things, and I can now control my Christmas lights from my iPhone. And that's a simple application. But I think we have more and more applications coming where IoT is going to impact our lives in many ways, hopefully all of which good. If it starts sending robots back in time to kill people, then we know we've gone too far, right?
So let me push back on this a little bit here with your definition. So I see a little bit of a logical challenge when we start defining the Internet of everything and say that everything connected to the Internet makes up the IoT, right? So JD was differentiating between people and things, right? And so that's an interesting discussion because you mentioned the Christmas lights, and you can control that, let's say, from your phone. How is that different than me controlling a screensaver on my laptop? Is my laptop part of IoT, or the Christmas lights part of IoT? Are they both IoT? Like, where do you draw the line between what's IoT and what's not?
I don't think there is a line. I think the line is wherever the application is. If you have a requirement to do something, and there's an application and a stack you can use to do it, I don't see why that shouldn't be included in the IoT, in the Internet of Things. Because at the moment, we have lots of really cool ideas. Can I do without IoT Christmas lights? Yes. But we are finding that IoT, or the umbrella of IoT, is covering medical devices. There are huge changes in medical devices. 802.15.6 is possibly a protocol that most people have never, ever heard of. But if you go into hospital in the next 10 years, 802.15.6 will be not 802.15.4, it was 802.15.4. I'm going to make up a letter now, but it's been broken off into its own protocol. And it's the application.
Is that the body area network?
Body area networks. Yeah. Okay. It's mentioned as a concept in some of the training materials, but now it's MBAN, medical body area networks, all based on 802.15.6. And it takes into account devices that send your temperature and your blood pressure. It also takes into account high-speed devices in the order of megabits. But of course, some of this stuff is very, very important. You need to find out what someone's heart rate is, and you can't have it being jammed by a microwave oven, for example. So protocols in use are very high priority options for certain measurements that are vital statistics for people's lives, for example. And it's a complete rewrite of what we all think is normal with 802.15.4, yet it's based on 802.15.4. It uses the concept of super frames, which of course are defined in 802.15.4. I've been looking into this for a separate project recently, and it's going to be the way that medical devices are done in the future. The idea is when you walk in, instead of them having to put on wired devices to monitor your heart rate and other things, they will just simply scan an IoT device, stick it on your body somewhere, and that for the duration of your hospital stay will be associated with you. there's a lot of back-end SQL and stuff going on as well, tying this device to Phil Morgan, who's just been admitted, measuring his temperature, heart rate, heart. What's the ECGs?
EKG, ECGs.
Yeah. All of this is now coming under the same protocol, and it's replacing wires. So we are finding new opportunities to do stuff that we didn't do yesterday. And I think tomorrow there's going to be even more stuff, and it's all going to be under the IoT umbrella.
Fact,
so that's interesting.
Boy, I really liked your question there, and I think it kind of forced me to think through that a little bit more. And I think the difference there is the interactive session, right? IoT generally does not have that interactive session aside from maybe that initial setup, and from that point on, it is managed elsewhere. Where when we think of, say, the Internet of Users, if we want to use that term, it's all about that interactive session and someone driving the machine to consume information or provide information.
I think that's a really good key point. Up until now, our entire Wi-Fi experience has been reading email, watching a movie, web browsing. It's very, very interactive. And Wi-Fi doesn't suit IoT for the reason you said, JD, right? The IoT is not so much interactive. It's information that needs to be gathered. It's gathering information on things, the temperature of the liquid in the container, in an oil industry, for example, the flow of material. We're making bread. Are we adding the right amount of additives we have to add, which is controlled by some device, which is reporting back a flow? All of these concepts don't fit nicely into the Wi-Fi world because they may need to send information or report data once every 10 seconds, once a minute, once an hour, once a week. That doesn't fit into the Wi-Fi concept. And I think that may be a differentiator, which is something we can look at and talk about maybe.
So, Avril, you were trying to get in there.
Yeah, I was going to say that my very first IoT project that I worked on was actually pre-Zigbee. It was actually why the standards were being defined for 802.15.4. And one of the things we were doing was putting monitors on new premature babies. Because parents come in and they see them all wired, and it adds to the stress of the situation. And so the health industry has been working on this for a long, long time. So a lot of people think, oh, this is new and it's really exciting, but it's actually been out there for an awful long time. And I also think it's really interesting because once you start doing this from a philosophy perspective, dare I take us down that path, a human could become a thing. Because these things are going to go inside your body, right? Your pacemaker, your whatever it is, these things are on you now. So the boundary lines between, things and humans could potentially disappear. And also this concept of, IoT today is, hey, I send information or gather information, but that's also going to change because it's not going to be long before think about it. If I'm gathering information about, let's say you've got something in your heart, maybe they can actually put something in your heart that can actually do something to fix it. Like rather than you going into hospital, they could in the future fix it where you are based on what's inside of you, right? So, these things could happen down the road so the boundary lines is what I'm saying is all going to blur. And so I think that's why I said I think you've got to just leave the world to be exciting and see what happens here. Yeah.
Well, I think that pacemakers are tuned, aren't they, via Bluetooth today?
Yeah, I think they are.
Yeah. So you go in for a checkup, and instead of them being invasive and have to plug into a hole in your chest, they connect up about a short distance to a Bluetooth machine. It's kind of like going into the service center with your car. They check out, read the statistics off, and maybe fine-tune it a little bit. And you've just sat next to a machine for a little bit of time. And I think, and I like what you said, Avril. You were using IoT before it was called IoT, I think is the point there, right?
Yeah.
That terminology we've now brought into IoT, but it was called something else back then.
Yeah,
I think that's
sensors.
awesome. Yeah.
It was a sensor network. Yeah.
I think the origin of IoT was when they were working on with RFID technology, and they were positioning it to management to sell that technology. They coined the term IoT to kind of define the technology that they're working on. But I'm not sure we're going to solve this problem or to solve the definition today. But I just wanted to get have a little discussion about that. But you guys brought up a lot of interesting points, I think, that kind of leads us to the next part of the podcast I wanted to talk about, which is the CWISE certification from CWNP. All right. So for those listeners who aren't aware, the CWISE forms the top of the pyramid for the parallel IoT track to the already established Wi-Fi side of things in CWNP. Right. And we've talked about some of the things Avril mentioned. She likes to focus on the low level connectivity, two radios connecting to each other. There's a lot of different protocols involved with IoT. But there's also, as Phil mentioned, to bring all that data back, you have to start, transferring it into some sort of database, like an SQL database. Now you're looking at connecting multiple IoT systems together. Right. So the CWISE kind of brings all those worlds together. And so what I'd like to do now is just hear some thoughts. And I guess we'll start with JD this time. But I wanted to hear your thoughts on your background, your experience with IoT, and a little bit about your journey towards earning your CWISE.
Well, I mean, I think like a lot of people in IT, I love to experiment, and I've kind of been experimenting with the things that we now call IoT for a long time. I was kind of closely followed the developments of Zigbee and Z-Wave back in the days, and had probably fairly early automated home for long before anyone was talking about it, just because it was a good test bed and a good place to experiment. And I recognized that at some point that was going to be something kind of bigger. So it kind of started there, and as I continued to dive and dig, we began to see this kind of higher conversation take place around IoT, and I remember being at Cisco Live years ago, and they were talking about this whole connected farm, and I'm looking at that and I'm going, well, that's great, but Cisco sells Wi-Fi gear, and I think I might have even written a blog about it or something, because the issue, of course, with that is to cover 1,000 acres in Wi-Fi is just completely untenable. I mean, it's for farming systems that they can buy 100 tractors for what it would cost to actually cover these fields in Wi-Fi. And so, of course, Wi-Fi is not the answer. And so that kind of pushed me to kind of continue to dig into that. When CWNP began discussing it and first released what became the CWISA, I was like, hey, this is the stuff, this is what I've been playing with for a long time. So when the job task analysis came open for connectivity professional, I was like, I'm on board. This is the stuff I've been reading about. This is the stuff I've been experimenting with and playing with, and kind of got into that and kind of helped shape that a little bit. Now, one of the interesting things about that is even in that committee, it was a fantastic time. Troy, you were in that team, I believe.
Not the connectivity.
Okay, that's right. You were in IIP. We had a lot of really intense discussions around which protocols matter, right, and which protocols are important, and which ones should we be covering for a professional, right? There was a lot of discussion around Z-Wave, for example, and CBRS and some of these protocols, and ultimately we kind of filtered it down to 10. But even then, we recognized that we were at this place where there's so much change happening so fast that rather than a 3-year commitment for kind of reviewing this, which is the standard, we actually dropped that down to 2 years. So even over that period of time, there's been this huge transition, and I've been really happy to be part of that and part of that discussion. I taught the first CWICP class, which I think Phil was part of, and I kind of feel bad for those people who were in that. It was first time I taught in that format, and of course teaching material that was brand new, not just to me, but brand new to everyone, was quite an interesting experience. But we had a fantastic group of people, some fantastic discussions. And then from there, I knew I wanted to still be part of it. So I also contributed to the CWIDP job task analysis. So that's kind of been my work through this process. And then I'll quickly tell the funny story of actually getting my CWISE. I was at the beach and got a phone call from Tom. I knew that I was at some point going to be getting a phone call saying, "Hey, are you ready to do this?" And he called me. I believe it was on I believe it was Friday, and said, "Hey, are you ready to take your CWISE?" And I said, "Well, I haven't taken CWIIP." And of course, you know, they were doing the betas for CWIDP. And he said, "Well, just so happens I can do that. We can do that." And I was like, I'm not ready for IIP, I don't think. And he said, "You're probably more ready that, you know, based on our discussions, you're probably more ready than you think." So I agreed to do those exams on Sunday. So while at the beach, my fantastic girlfriend, who always gives me a hard time about not taking time to chill out, put up with me studying a little bit on Saturday and a little bit on Sunday. And I took the IIP first, then immediately rolled into the beta for IBP. And for people who have never taken a beta exam, you don't take 60 questions and then get a result. You actually have to answer every question that's in the test pool. So I was taking very long exams. And so took one, no break, immediately rolled into the other one, did excellent on that one. Like, okay, I'm through this. I'm eligible for CWISE. And Tom's immediately like, "Great, all right, let's do it." And we immediately rolled into the CWISE interview.
Wow.
The funny thing is, I have to give Tom props because by that point, my brain was mush. As anyone who's ever left one exam can tell you, you know, you kind of leave more exhausted than you expected. And my brain was mush, but I managed, I guess, to convince him that I still knew what I was talking about, and came out on the backside of that, and with CWISE number 5, which I'm very happy with, and then immediately shut down my laptop and ran off to meet everyone I was at the beach with at a bar to listen to music and sit in the sun, wondering what in the world just happened, and you know, where is my brain? But that was my fun experience getting the CWISE.
Wow, that's quite the challenge. Yeah, writing the 3 exams, doing the CWISE exam is the last one of that series. That's impressive. Well done. I was one of the ones that was able to sit your class when you first delivered it, and I did enjoy your class. So kudos to you, JD. It was an excellent class. There's a lot of different protocols and technologies to cover, and I thought you did an exceptional job there. So it was a pleasure to have been a student in your class.
You had like about 6 CWNEs, I think, didn't you, JD?
I want to say it was. I believe it was 12 or 13 total people, and all but 2 had CWNEs. Yeah. And so the real interesting challenge there was actually getting people who had spent, you know, their whole career thinking about everything from an 802.11 and a Wi-Fi perspective to kind of transition those thoughts into into IoT. And it's really difficult because when you think about some of the basics of 15.4, for example, you have these really, really tiny data frames, and so a frame is now I have to think about it, is it 64 bytes, I believe, which is so small, and there's all of these little things that kind of go along with that, and you're also talking about transmitting at between 20 and 250 kilobits per second, not megabits per second, right? And so there's a lot that kind of changes and that you kind of have to consider in that process. And so that was interesting. There were 2 people who were not CWNEs. I spent a little bit extra time with both of those because I'm afraid that we might have lost them a little bit in some of our conversations. But it was definitely hurting a very intelligent cats, but it was a fantastic time, and I think hopefully we all left better for it. I know I certainly did.
Great. Avril, let's transition to you. Tell us a little bit about your entry into IoT and your journey to become CWISE number 6.
So I didn't participate in any of the course development for this or exam development at all. And so I was like the guinea pig that came in, and the first one I took was the CWICP, I think was the one I took. And
okay, the connectivity.
The connectivity one that just had all the standards in there, all the wireless standards. And fortunately, I've worked on all of them. so I'm a standards person. So over the years, there isn't much on the wireless side that I haven't worked on. I've worked on even the satellite systems, the cellular systems, the WiMAX, you name it, I've worked on it. So I was the guinea pig that came into that one. And I did manage to pass it. I was a bit surprised. I went, whew, I wasn't expecting that because it was just so diverse. It was a very difficult exam because of the diversity. Like when you do the Wi-Fi ones, you can just deep dive into Wi-Fi and one bit of knowledge reinforces the other bit. With this one, it's like, well, which frequency does that one work in? And how does it connect again? And you're all over the place, and you're jumping from standards as you go through the question. So it was a challenging exam, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. The other ones, I don't think I could have passed without taking the training. Right? Simply because it's not the world that I live in. And, like I don't do Python programming. I'm not working on the databases and things like that. And I found it absolutely fascinating to take the training and to see how the systems were being deployed and really get a much wider perspective, because I'm so low level that sometimes and that's the world I love to be in, but you lose your perspective when you're in that world. And this really pushed me upwards. And I think the final exam, which they're doing very differently for the CWNE, and I don't know whether I should talk about it or not, because I don't know, I can't remember what's been written on the website, but that one is like an interview. And what I found was in the CWNE, when I did that one, you could submit yourself on what you were passionate about. So I could get away with being low level, and I write all my stuff on that and say, this is what I know about, right? And I've got years of experience on this. When I did the verbal exam and got questions at the higher level, I'm like, well, I just, vaguely remember what I learned in the training course, and I have vague memories of what I thought about it. And I was like, oh, please give me a radio question. There's got to be one here somewhere. And that was really difficult for me. I was like, oh, they think the interview is going to be easier for people, but for me personally, it was much harder, simply because I am rather tunnel focused on what I work on.
Right. So having gone through that, do you prefer one over the other, like the video format, the interview style format for CWISE, or the submitting the essays and then having that evaluated after the fact? Do you have a preference one over the other?
I have a strong preference for what they've done with the IoT one, because I think it forced me to grow. And I'm, when you've had years of experience in the industry and you're focused and you're expert in the area, you just, I don't want to say complacent, but you can make money doing that. And so why do anything else, right? You've got your claim to fame and on you go. It really forced me, and I really enjoyed the learning. And I think it's also I think it forced me to have a wide perspective, but I think it's more relevant for people going into the industry, for people getting work, getting jobs. I think, being tunnel focused like me is great if you're doing what I do and you're called in to do a specialist, but it's not great if someone's bringing me into an IT organization saying, deploy this in my organization. You really bring me in when you need to troubleshoot something, very specific and low level. But people who are deploying this need to have the wider perspective. So I think it's really good for the industry. And the interviewing, I think, is fantastic because it really puts you on the spot, really forces the knowledge, and it really exposed my weaknesses and my vulnerabilities, which the CWNE didn't.
Yeah. JD, what are your thoughts on the interview process for CWISE?
When we were first discussing that as a possibility, I wasn't fully on board with it. I was a little afraid that might be too easy, I guess, right? And I think looking forward, I kind of hope there's a little bit of a hybrid approach, that there's a little bit of an application process and some mission processes. And I hope that there is also that interview. Because like Avril, what I realized is that you can't go into that interview and blow smoke, because it's real time and you can ask questions and you can dive deeper. And if someone says something that is not right, you can immediately follow up and go, okay, let's get back to that and tell me more. Where if everything is kind of pre-written, pre-formatted, pre-checked and everything, it's kind of easy to go, okay, I'm going to write 3 essays and I'm going to have, technical editors to look at these essays and ensure that I haven't made any mistakes. And it's a little bit more, it's a little easier to present that perfect scenario, right? There's a lot of discussion around this whole, social media thing where we want everyone to see us as these perfect individuals that we aren't really. And in many ways, in that interview process, you can do the same thing if you put the effort into it. Whereas when you're on a video conference and you're being recorded and you're being asked real life active questions, you can't participate in that same way, and it has to be real time, and you have to think and you have to dive a little deeper and you have to be able to apply things maybe in a different way. It's one thing to know the building blocks, it's another thing to know how those building blocks fit together. So I was actually really, after going through it, even with my brain leaking out of my ear, I was actually really impressed with that. And I hope that is something that is kind of carried forward. I think it'll be really useful.
It was worse than a job interview, wasn't it, JD?
In many ways.
Because with a job interview, you can build a relationship, a bit of rapport, right? Here, with this, it's just here's the question, here's your answer. It's very intimidating. It was hard.
Well, it's also interesting too, I think, because it gives an opportunity to learn that person's thought processes, right? So it's not just a question of do they know the answer, but it's a question of how do they arrive at the answer based on the knowledge they have. And so I think that's really useful for it because again, that there are those items that maybe the person doesn't know the correct answer, but they can talk their way all the way up to it, and it's that easy. It's easy to go, okay, they have the concepts, they just maybe in the heat of the moment or whatever, they're just not putting that final. So there's a little bit of wiggle room in some ways, and in other ways it's very precise because again you can dig wherever you need to.
Yeah. So Phil, you've also gone through the video exam. Or the video interview? What did you think of it?
Yeah, I agree with everything everybody said, and to the point of it being like an interview, I actually thought it was worse than an interview because at an interview you get feedback. Because the interviewer is like, well, why do you think that? And Tom doing the videos, he got the question and he was like, okay, next question. You got no feedback. So we're all human beings and we're all going, did I say the right thing? Did I say something I shouldn't have said? But I think that's good because it gives you an opportunity to give your viewpoint. And as we've talked about, the problem with the essays is, did you write the essay or did you have somebody to technical edit it and so on and so forth? And so the essay is a presentation, just like, a resume. whenever you send a resume, and everybody gets it spell checked, even if they just use the online spell checker or something. But the interview is in the raw. It's you giving your opinion, answering the question, and if you say the wrong thing, if you say the right thing, if you correct yourself, it really is showing you. It's where the rubber meets the road, right? It's when you have the video recording of you. You can say, well, actually, you can change your mind, but you can show the thought pattern, which I think is more important. Rather than a presentation you've prepared of something, it shows you and your thought patterns and your knowledge and experience in this little, 15, 20-minute window when you are asked questions live. And I actually enjoyed it afterwards. Maybe not so much during, but afterwards, looking back on it, I passed. So obviously there's that with it. But coming up to it and during, I did find it somewhat stressful, but we deal with stress all the times in our lives, right? And it's something you have to do. And I actually like it. And I think it's a good way moving forward. To JD's point, I see his point. We still need to make sure the technical requirements are met. So it may change in the future. But again, you've passed the exams. Yeah. Maybe hopefully done the courses, done some preparation. To Avril's point, I thought that was brilliant what you said, Avril, that you had the experience and you went into the exam. Now that's great because it shows that the exam is real. It's not something that somebody made up on paper and you're memorizing loads and loads and loads of information about something. Mm-hmm. You work with the protocols and you pass the exam. I think that's great news for CWICP because it means it's relevant.
Right. And while you were talking, Phil, I realized that one of the nice things about these interviews as well is going to be a lot easier for people that perhaps aren't native English speaking.
Very much so.
Because, when they're broken English, it's much harder for them to write essays and to get their knowledge across. Verbally, it might be a lot easier for them. Yeah,
that is true, actually. And also, there are some people who just don't like exams. They break under pressure of exams because the stress and, writing I know multiple people that haven't applied for the CWNE because they don't want to sit down and write 1,000 words on something. It's just, they'll gladly bit level troubleshoot protocols going across the network, but write an essay and they start to sweat because some of us just don't like documentation, right? The D word, document.
One of the most important things in networking, the D word, yeah.
D word, yes.
Document.